Ferrari gets ready to launch a protest after Mercedes' engine trick revealed. Leaked Red Bull performance gives Verstappen a boost. And all the latest F1 news. Formula One just exploded with controversy. And we're not even in testing season yet. While teams are supposed to be quietly preparing for the 2026 regulation changes, a massive scandal is brewing behind the scenes that could completely reshape the championship before it even begins. Two powerhouse teams have allegedly discovered a loophole so clever, so potentially game-changing, that their rivals are already demanding answers from the sport's governing body. What if I told you that Mercedes and Red Bull might have just cracked the code to extract significantly more horsepower from their engines while technically staying within the rules? This isn't about pushing boundaries during a race weekend. This is about fundamentally rewriting how Formula One engines could operate in the new era, and the implications are staggering. The heart of this controversy lies in something called compression ratio, a technical concept that most fans never think about but could determine who dominates the grid for years to come. To understand why Ferrari, Honda, and Audi are absolutely furious right now, we need to dive into the engineering masterpiece that these two teams have potentially pulled off. Let me break this down in simple terms. Every engine has cylinders where fuel and air get compressed before ignition. The compression ratio measures how much that mixture gets squeezed. Think of it like pressing down on a sponge. The more you compress it, the more explosive the release when you let go. In Formula One terms, higher compression typically equals more power and speed. For the 2026 season, Formula One made a crucial change to attract more manufacturers to the sport. They lowered the maximum allowable compression ratio from 18.0 to 16.0. On paper, this should make engines slightly less powerful but more accessible for new manufacturers to develop competitive power units. Here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. The regulations specify that no cylinder can exceed a 16.0 compression ratio, and this measurement is taken when cars are stationary in the garage. But what happens when those same engines heat up during actual racing conditions? That's where thermal expansion comes into play, and apparently, that's where Mercedes and Red Bull found their golden opportunity. When metal heats up, it expands. This is basic physics that affects everything from bridges to spacecraft. In Formula One engines running at extreme temperatures, components naturally grow slightly larger as they heat up. What Mercedes and Red Bull have allegedly figured out is how to engineer their engines so that this thermal expansion actually increases their compression ratio from the legal 16.0 limit up to the previously allowed 18.0 when the engine reaches racing temperatures. Picture this scenario. FIA technical inspectors check the engine in the garage. Everything measures perfectly legal at 16.0 compression ratio. The car passes all static tests and gets the green light to race. But once that engine heats up on track, thermal expansion kicks in, and suddenly the compression ratio climbs to 18.0, delivering significantly more horsepower than what should be legally possible under the new regulations. This is engineering brilliance at its most controversial. These teams haven't technically broken any rules because the regulations only specify the compression ratio during static testing. But they've potentially found a way to exceed those limits when it actually matters during racing conditions. The magnitude of this discovery cannot be overstated. In Formula One, where lap time differences are measured in thousandths of seconds, any significant power advantage can translate to complete dominance. If confirmed, this thermal expansion trick could provide the kind of performance edge that determines championship outcomes. Red Bull's engine division deserves particular recognition here. Many people still think of them primarily as an energy drink company that happens to race cars. But their powertrain operation has become a serious engineering powerhouse. They've assembled a workforce of 600 engineers specifically for engine development. That's not a small side project, that's a full-scale assault on becoming a major power unit manufacturer. What makes this situation even more intriguing is the connection between Red Bull and Mercedes engineering talent. Red Bull has been aggressively recruiting engineers from Mercedes, poaching some of their most experienced powertrain specialists. This talent migration helps explain why both teams are apparently exploiting the same thermal expansion concept. When you hire someone's best engineers, you often inherit their deepest technical insights. The other manufacturers are understandably livid about this development. Ferrari, Honda, and Audi have invested enormous resources into developing engines that comply with the 16.0 compression ratio limit. If Mercedes and Red Bull gain approval for this thermal expansion approach, these other manufacturers face a stark choice: completely redesign their engines to incorporate similar technology or accept a significant competitive disadvantage. Ferrari, in particular, has reasons to be concerned. They've built their reputation on engine excellence, and the prospect of falling behind due to a regulatory interpretation they didn't pursue could be devastating for their championship aspirations. Honda and Audi, meanwhile, are investing heavily in their Formula One futures and certainly don't want to start the new regulation era already at a technical disadvantage. The FIA now faces an incredibly difficult decision. They must determine whether this thermal expansion technique violates the spirit of the regulations, even if it technically complies with the letter of the law. The governing body designed the 16.0 compression ratio limit specifically to level the playing field and make engine development more accessible. If two teams can effectively bypass that limitation through thermal expansion, it undermines the entire purpose of the regulation change. This controversy also highlights a fundamental challenge in modern Formula One regulation writing. Engineers have become so sophisticated at finding loopholes that every rule change creates new opportunities for creative interpretation. The FIA tries to write comprehensive regulations, but there's always another angle that brilliant engineers can exploit. The timing of this discovery adds another layer of drama. We're still weeks away from pre-season testing, yet the controversy is already dominating headlines. This suggests that information about the thermal expansion technique has leaked from within the paddock, possibly through engineer movements between teams or insider sources familiar with development programs. What happens next could reshape the entire 2026 season before it begins. If the FIA approves this thermal expansion approach, every manufacturer will need to rapidly develop similar technology or risk falling hopelessly behind. If they ban it, Mercedes and Red Bull might lose a significant competitive advantage they've spent considerable resources developing. The stakes extend beyond just one season. Engine regulations typically remain stable for several years, meaning whatever decision the FIA makes now could influence championship battles well into the decade. A wrong call could create a period of dominance similar to Mercedes' hybrid-era supremacy or Red Bull's recent championship run. For fans, this controversy represents everything fascinating about Formula One's technical side. While drivers get most of the attention, these behind-the-scenes engineering battles often determine who actually wins championships. The thermal expansion technique showcases the incredible ingenuity of Formula One engineers and their relentless pursuit of every possible performance advantage. This situation also demonstrates why teams work so hard to maintain secrecy during development. Mercedes and Red Bull probably hope to keep this technique quiet until much closer to the season's start. Early exposure gives rivals more time to protest, develop countermeasures, or pressure the FIA for clarification. As we await the FIA's response, one thing is certain. The 2026 Formula One season promises to deliver controversy and excitement even before the first green light. Whether this thermal expansion technique becomes a game-changing innovation or a banned loophole, it's already proven that Formula One's technical arms race never stops, and the most brilliant engineers always find new ways to push the boundaries of what's possible. Picture this. While every other Formula One team was desperately trying to squeeze the last drops of performance out of their 2024 cars, Mercedes was already playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. They made a calculated gamble that's now looking like the smartest move in recent F1 history, and it could hand them the keys to complete domination in 2026. What if I told you that Mercedes didn't just give up on 2024 early? They discovered something that could make them virtually unbeatable when the new regulations hit. Today, we're diving deep into why the Silver Arrows might have just pulled off the greatest long-term strategy in modern Formula One, and how a technical loophole could reshape the entire sport for years to come. Let me take you back to early 2024. While Red Bull was still riding high on their championship momentum, and other teams were desperately developing their cars to close the gap, Mercedes made a decision that seemed almost defeatist at the time. They essentially threw in the towel on their 2024 championship hopes and shifted virtually all their resources toward 2026. Many called it surrender. Others questioned their commitment. But what looked like weakness was actually the most ruthless strategic move we've seen in years. Think about it from a business perspective. Mercedes knew they weren't going to challenge for the championship this year. Instead of pouring millions into marginal gains that would become obsolete anyway, they redirected that enormous budget, those brilliant engineering minds, and all that development time toward the future. While their competitors were fighting yesterday's war, Mercedes was already preparing for tomorrow's battlefield. But here's where this story gets absolutely fascinating. The 2026 regulations represent the biggest shakeup Formula One has seen in over a decade. We're talking about completely new power unit specifications, dramatically different aerodynamic rules, and a fundamental shift in how these cars generate speed. It's not just an evolution, it's a revolution, and revolutions create opportunities for those bold enough to seize them. Mercedes understood something crucial that others might have missed. In Formula One, when regulations change this dramatically, early development advantage isn't just helpful, it's absolutely devastating to your competition. The team that gets the biggest head start often maintains that advantage for years. Look at Mercedes' own domination from 2014 to 2020 when the hybrid era began. They started developing their power unit earlier than everyone else, and that initial advantage carried them through 6 consecutive championship doubles. Now, here's where this gets really interesting. Sources within the paddock are suggesting that Mercedes, along with Red Bull's new powertrain division, have discovered what they believe is a loophole in the 2026 regulations. This isn't just any minor advantage. We're talking about a potential game changer that could fundamentally alter the power delivery of these new engines. The technical details are complex, but essentially it involves using thermal expansion to manipulate compression ratios in ways that the current regulation writers might not have anticipated. If you're not an engineer, think of it like finding a way to squeeze significantly more power out of your engine without technically violating any written rules. The compression ratio is crucial for engine performance. Higher compression generally means more power, more efficiency, and better fuel economy. Current regulations limit compression ratios to a specific level, but Mercedes and Red Bull engineers believe they've found a way to work around this limitation through clever thermal management. When engines heat up during operation, metal components expand. If you design your engine cleverly enough, this thermal expansion could theoretically increase your compression ratio beyond what the regulations technically allow, while staying within the letter of the law. But here's the kicker, and this is why Mercedes might have the ultimate advantage. They're reportedly much further along in developing and refining this concept than anyone else. While Red Bull is pursuing similar ideas, Mercedes has apparently been working on this approach longer and has already solved many of the technical challenges that come with implementing such a complex system. Think about what this means practically. If the FIA rules that this thermal expansion approach is legal, Mercedes won't just have a small advantage, they could have a massive power unit superiority that gives them a multiple second per lap advantage over their competitors. In Formula One, where races are often decided by tenths of seconds, having a multiple second advantage would be like bringing a rocket ship to a bicycle race. The implications go far beyond just Mercedes' own team. They supply power units to several other teams on the grid, including McLaren, Williams, and starting next year, Alpine. If Mercedes has cracked the code on these 2026 engines, all of their customer teams suddenly become serious championship contenders. Imagine McLaren with their already excellent chassis paired with a Mercedes power unit that's significantly superior to everyone else's. Or Williams, who've shown flashes of brilliance, suddenly having the horsepower to match their engineering talent. This could completely reshape the competitive landscape of Formula One. Instead of having one dominant team, we might see 4 or 5 Mercedes-powered cars regularly fighting for wins and podiums. The championship fight could become a Mercedes civil war, with their customer teams potentially even challenging the factory team for supremacy. But let's talk about why Mercedes was uniquely positioned to pursue this development path. Their engine division has been the benchmark in Formula One for over a decade. They have some of the most talented engineers in the sport, state-of-the-art facilities, and perhaps most importantly, they have experience successfully navigating major regulation changes. When the hybrid era began in 2014, Mercedes didn't just adapt. They dominated because they started earlier and thought differently than everyone else. Red Bull clearly recognized this threat, which explains their aggressive recruitment campaign targeting Mercedes engineers for their new powertrain division. They literally tried to buy Mercedes' expertise by hiring away their key personnel, but institutional knowledge, established processes, and years of head start development aren't things you can simply purchase by hiring a few engineers. The psychological aspect of this situation is equally fascinating. Mercedes' early pivot to 2026 development sent a clear message to the entire paddock. They're playing a longer game than everyone else. While other teams were focused on immediate results, Mercedes was thinking 3 years ahead. That kind of strategic thinking often separates champions from also-rans in Formula One. There's also the infrastructure advantage to consider. Mercedes' engine facility in Brixworth is essentially a small city dedicated to internal combustion perfection. They have dyno rooms, test cells, and development equipment that costs hundreds of millions of dollars. When you combine that kind of infrastructure with a 2-year head start on development, the advantages compound exponentially. The FIA now faces an incredibly difficult decision. If they rule that Mercedes' thermal expansion approach is legal, they're essentially handing the German manufacturer a potential multi-year dominance period. If they ban it, they're potentially stifling innovation and punishing clever engineering that technically stays within the rules as written. This decision will likely shape not just who wins championships in 2026 and beyond, but how teams approach regulation changes in the future. If Mercedes' aggressive early development strategy pays off with multiple championship victories, you can bet every team will be more willing to sacrifice short-term results for long-term advantages when the next major regulation change occurs. What makes this situation even more intriguing is the timing. We're still over a year away from the 2026 season, but the technical decisions being made right now are already determining who will be fighting for championships and who will be struggling just to score points. Formula One has always been as much about the engineering battle as the driving battle, but rarely have we seen such a clear example of how strategic thinking and early development can create seemingly insurmountable advantages. The ripple effects of Mercedes' 2026 preparations are already being felt throughout the paddock. Other manufacturers are scrambling to accelerate their own development programs. Teams are re-evaluating their technical partnerships, and everyone is trying to understand exactly what Mercedes knows that they don't. For Formula One fans, this developing situation represents everything that makes the sport so captivating beyond just the wheel-to-wheel racing. The chess match between teams, the technological innovation, and the strategic gambles that can pay off years later all combine to create storylines that are just as compelling as any on-track battle. As we head toward 2026, Mercedes appears to have positioned themselves perfectly for another era of dominance. Their early commitment to future development, combined with their engineering excellence and potential regulatory advantages, could make them virtually unbeatable when the new era begins. Whether that's good for Formula One as a spectacle remains to be seen, but there's no denying the brilliance of their strategic approach. The next chapter of Formula One history might already be written, and Mercedes appears to be holding the pen. The Formula One silly season is officially over, but if you think the teams are taking a break right now, you're dead wrong. In fact, what's happening behind closed doors at every F1 factory around the world might shock you. The 2026 season is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before, and the preseason testing? Well, it's going to be one massive game of poker where nobody shows their cards. What I'm about to reveal will completely change how you watch those first testing sessions in Barcelona. Because while everyone else will be trying to figure out who's fastest, the real story will be happening right under our noses. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the biggest names in Formula One are already predicting that 2026 will be absolute chaos. Right now, as we speak, there's a race against time happening at every single F1 team. Engineers are working around the clock, aerodynamicists are pulling all-nighters, and team principals are making decisions that could define their next decade in the sport. The pressure is unlike anything we've seen since the hybrid era began back in 2014. But here's the thing that most fans don't realize. When these new cars finally hit the track for pre-season testing, what you see won't be what you get. The teams are already planning to hide their true potential, and there's a very strategic reason why. Let me paint you a picture of what's really happening right now. While most of us are enjoying the winter break, Formula One teams are experiencing some of the most intense months of their entire year. The period between the season finale and pre-season testing isn't a break at all. It's actually when the real work begins. Every team is frantically preparing their first 2026 machines, and the challenges they're facing are enormous. We're talking about completely new regulations, revolutionary changes to both chassis and power units, and a level of uncertainty that the sport hasn't experienced in over a decade. Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur recently made some fascinating comments about what we should expect from the 2026 season. His insights are absolutely crucial for understanding what's really going to happen when these cars finally take to the track. According to Vasseur, trying to predict the 2026 hierarchy based on pre-season testing will be completely pointless. He believes that most teams will focus entirely on reliability during the early months of the season, with true performance only emerging much later in the year. This is a complete departure from recent seasons where teams have been able to show their hand relatively early. In 2026, reliability will trump everything else, and there's a very good reason for this approach. Think about it this way. When the hybrid era began in 2014, we saw multiple teams struggling with fundamental reliability issues. Cars were breaking down left and right, and some teams were so far behind that they never really caught up. The same thing could happen in 2026, but potentially on an even bigger scale. The new regulations are so comprehensive that teams are essentially starting from scratch. Every single component needs to be redesigned, tested, and validated. The margin for error is enormous, and the consequences of getting it wrong could be catastrophic for a team's entire season. This is why teams like Cadillac, Audi, and even Mercedes are already signaling that they'll bring relatively basic packages to Barcelona testing. They're not trying to impress anyone with raw speed. Instead, they're focused on making sure their cars can actually complete a race distance without falling apart. But here's where it gets really interesting. While some teams are being forced into this conservative approach out of necessity, others are choosing it as a strategic decision. The teams that started their 2026 development programs early have a massive advantage right now. Williams, for example, has been working on their 2026 car for months longer than some of their competitors. They're already finalizing not just their initial specification, but their first major upgrade package as well. This kind of head start could be absolutely crucial when the season begins. However, even these well-prepared teams won't show their true potential during pre-season testing. The smart money says they'll run conservative programs, gather data, and keep their real performance hidden until the season starts. This creates a fascinating dynamic where the teams that are struggling will be easier to spot, while the teams that are in strong positions will deliberately keep themselves under the radar. It's going to make pre-season testing almost impossible to read from a performance perspective. The financial restrictions and limited wind tunnel time are also playing a huge role in how teams are approaching their development programs. Some teams are literally still producing the first components that will be used in pre-season testing. Their assembly lines are working overtime just to have basic cars ready for the first day of testing. For these teams, the first few races of the season will essentially be extended testing sessions. They'll be learning about their cars in real race conditions, making fundamental changes between events, and hoping they can find performance quickly enough to stay competitive. This situation is unprecedented in the modern era of Formula One. We're used to teams arriving at pre-season testing with cars that are already highly refined and relatively reliable. In 2026, that simply won't be the case for many teams. The engine manufacturers are facing their own unique challenges. The new power unit regulations require significant changes to both the internal combustion engine and the hybrid systems. Getting these complex systems to work reliably while also delivering competitive performance is an enormous technical challenge. From hydraulics to suspension to electronic systems, Every single aspect of these cars needs to be validated before they can be considered race-ready. The teams that manage this process most effectively will have a massive advantage once the season begins. The psychological aspect of this situation is equally fascinating. Team principals and engineers know that their competitors are facing the same challenges, but nobody knows exactly where everyone else stands. This creates an environment of uncertainty that we haven't seen in Formula One for years. Some teams might discover fundamental flaws in their concepts during pre-season testing. Others might find that their conservative approach has left them with reliable but uncompetitive cars. The variation in performance and reliability could be enormous when the season starts. This is why Ferrari's Fred Vasseur is so confident that the 2026 hierarchy won't become clear until well into the season. Teams will be constantly developing, constantly learning, and constantly adapting their approaches based on what they discover about their own cars and their competitors. The implications for fans are huge. We're going to witness a season unlike any other in recent Formula One history. The unpredictability, the potential for surprise results, and the drama of teams either succeeding or failing with their new concepts will make for incredible entertainment. But it all starts with pre-season testing, where the real story won't be about lap times or speed traps. It'll be about which teams can get their cars to run reliably, which concepts show early promise, and which teams might be in serious trouble before the season even begins. The next few months will determine the fate of every team on the grid for potentially years to come. The decisions being made right now in factories around the world will echo through the 2026 season and beyond. So when you watch those first testing sessions, remember what you've learned here today. Look beyond the headlines about fastest lap times. Pay attention to which teams are completing the most laps, which cars are running smoothly, and which teams seem to be struggling with basic reliability. The 2026 Formula One season is going to be absolutely wild, and it all starts with the most deceptive pre-season testing we've ever seen. Don't miss a moment of it. What if I told you that half the cars on the Formula One grid might be cheating right now, and nobody knows about it? That's exactly what Max Verstappen just claimed, and his reasoning will blow your mind. Picture this scenario. You're watching your favorite team cross the finish line in celebration, only to find out hours later they've been disqualified for breaking technical regulations. This isn't some hypothetical situation. It happened 5 times during the 2025 Formula One season, and according to the 3-time world champion, it's just the tip of the iceberg. The 2025 season became a masterclass in technical drama. We witnessed not 1, not 2, but 5 separate disqualifications that sent shockwaves through the paddock. Both Ferrari cars got the boot in China. Pierre Gasly's Alpine faced the same fate, and then came the bombshell that changed everything. Both McLaren drivers were thrown out in Las Vegas. Now, before we dive deeper into Verstappen's explosive claims, let me paint you the complete picture of what really happened in Vegas, because this story gets absolutely wild. Lando Norris had just crossed the line in second place, with Oscar Piastri finishing 4th. The McLaren garage was celebrating what looked like a massive points haul. But then came the technical inspection that turned their dreams into nightmares. Instead of the usual quick weigh-in that most cars receive, both McLarens were selected for extensive testing. Here's where it gets technical, but stay with me because this is crucial. Every Formula One car has these things called skid blocks underneath. They're basically protective plates that prevent the cars from running too low to the ground. The regulations state these blocks must be at least 9 millimeters thick after the race. Think of it like a minimum height requirement for your car's undercarriage. When technical delegate Joe Bauer's team measured the McLarens, they found multiple violations. Norris had 2 measurements below the legal limit. His front right block measured just 8.88 millimeters, and his right rear was 8.93. Piastri was even worse off, with 3 illegal measurements across different parts of his car. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Norris lost 18 championship points, Piastri lost 12. In a championship battle where every single point matters, this was catastrophic for McLaren's title hopes. But here's where Verstappen's story becomes absolutely fascinating. The Red Bull driver didn't just celebrate this stroke of luck. he revealed something that should make every Formula One fan question what they're really watching. According to Max, if the FIA decided to thoroughly inspect all 20 cars after every single race, they would discover that roughly half of them are running below the legal limits. Let that sink in for a moment. We're talking about 10 cars potentially cheating in plain sight, race after race. Think about the implications here. Teams are essentially playing a high-stakes game of roulette. They know they might be breaking the rules, but they're banking on the fact that their car won't be selected for detailed inspection. It's like speeding on the highway, knowing there's only a small chance you'll encounter a speed trap. Verstappen explained this mentality perfectly when he said that everyone tries to find the limit, and sometimes you get away with it because you're not always checked. The randomness of the system creates this perverse incentive structure where teams can gain illegal performance advantages as long as they're lucky enough to avoid scrutiny. Alex Albon, the Williams driver, called out this exact problem immediately after the McLaren disqualifications. He pointed out that the random nature of these checks essentially opens the door for teams to run illegal cars. His logic is bulletproof. If you knew there was only a small chance of getting caught, wouldn't you be tempted to push the boundaries? Albon even suggested that teams could run their cars completely to the deck if they wanted to, gaining massive performance advantages while facing minimal risk of detection. The only thing stopping this widespread cheating is the fear of being that unlucky team selected for testing. Now, you might be wondering why the FIA doesn't just inspect every car after every race. Verstappen addresses this practical limitation head-on. The simple answer is resources. Conducting thorough technical inspections on 20 cars after every race would require an army of personnel traveling to every Grand Prix around the world. The logistical nightmare and financial cost would be enormous. But let's talk about what this means for the integrity of the sport we love. Formula One prides itself on being the pinnacle of motorsport, where marginal gains and technical perfection separate the winners from the losers. If half the grid is potentially cheating, what does that say about the competition we're watching? The current system creates a two-tier championship. Teams that play by the rules and accept the performance penalty, and teams that roll the dice on illegal setups hoping to avoid detection. This isn't just unfair, it fundamentally undermines the entire premise of competitive motorsport. Consider the McLaren situation from a different angle. Their disqualification in Vegas wasn't just bad luck. It potentially cost them a realistic shot at the Drivers' Championship. Verstappen went into that penultimate round, trailing Norris by 24 points, and tied with Piastri. The McLaren DSQs completely changed the championship dynamics, and Verstappen ultimately came within 2 points of the title. But here's the kicker. Verstappen himself admitted this was like receiving an early Christmas present. The randomness of the system handed him a championship advantage that had nothing to do with on-track performance. Is this really how we want titles to be decided? The technical regulations exist for good reasons. The skid block rules prevent teams from running their cars dangerously low, which could create safety issues and provide unfair aerodynamic advantages. When teams circumvent these rules, they're not just gaining performance. They're potentially compromising safety protocols. This situation also raises questions about the FIA's enforcement capabilities. If Verstappen is correct and half the grid is running illegal cars, it suggests that the current inspection system is woefully inadequate. The sport's governing body needs to seriously reconsider how they monitor compliance with technical regulations. One potential solution would be more random inspections throughout race weekends, not just after the race. Teams might think twice about running illegal setups if they knew their car could be inspected at any point during practice, qualifying, or the race weekend. Another approach could be improved technology for real-time monitoring. Perhaps sensors could be developed to continuously monitor skid block wear or car weight throughout the race, providing instant feedback rather than waiting for post-race inspections. The financial implications are also staggering. Teams spend hundreds of millions of dollars developing their cars within the regulations, while others potentially gain advantages by skirting those same rules. This creates an uneven playing field that rewards risk-taking over legitimate engineering excellence. Looking ahead, This controversy might force fundamental changes to how Formula One polices itself. The sport cannot continue operating under a system where championship outcomes are influenced by the lottery of random inspections. Verstappen's revelation pulls back the curtain on a darker side of Formula One that fans rarely see. Behind the glamour and excitement, there's apparently a shadow championship where teams gamble on avoiding detection while gaining illegal advantages. This isn't the pinnacle of motorsport. It's a high-stakes casino where the house doesn't always win. The question now is whether Formula One will address this systemic problem or continue pretending that random inspections are sufficient to maintain competitive integrity. Based on Verstappen's bombshell claims, the current system is broken, and everyone in the paddock knows it. The only question is whether anyone has the courage to fix it before more championships are decided by technical roulette rather than racing excellence. What if I told you that one of the most anticipated partnerships in Formula One history might be falling apart before it even had a chance to truly begin? The Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari dream team that had fans around the world buzzing with excitement is now facing serious questions, and the Italian team is considering a dramatic change that could reshape everything we thought we knew about this legendary combination. When Lewis Hamilton shocked the motorsport world by announcing his move from Mercedes to Ferrari, it felt like witnessing history in the making. A 7-time world champion joining the most iconic team in Formula One seemed like a match made in racing heaven. The prancing horse had finally landed their white whale, and Hamilton would get his chance to add Ferrari red to his already legendary career. But sometimes, reality hits harder than expectation, and the 2025 season has been a harsh wake-up call for everyone involved. The numbers don't lie, and they're telling a story that Ferrari doesn't want to hear. Throughout the season, Hamilton has consistently found himself trailing his teammate Charles Leclerc in both qualifying sessions and race performances. We're talking about a driver who has dominated the sport for over a decade, yet he's looking like a shadow of his former self in that iconic red car. The gap isn't massive, but in a sport where milliseconds determine greatness, even small differences become glaring problems. But here's where things get really interesting. Team principal Fred Vasseur has admitted something that sends shockwaves through the paddock. Ferrari is seriously considering changing Hamilton's race engineer, Riccardo Adami. This isn't just a minor adjustment or a seasonal tweak. This is the team essentially admitting that one of the most crucial relationships in Formula One, the bond between a driver and their race engineer, isn't working. Think about what this means for a moment. The race engineer is essentially the driver's lifeline during those 2 hours of intense competition. They're the voice in the helmet, the strategic mind making split-second decisions, the person who understands every nuance of the car and can communicate that to the driver in the heat of battle. When that relationship breaks down, everything else falls apart. Vasseur's honesty about the situation is both refreshing and concerning. He's openly admitted that Ferrari underestimated just how difficult this transition would be for Hamilton. 20 years with Mercedes creates habits, expectations, and ways of working that don't just disappear overnight. Every piece of software is different. Every component behaves differently. Every person thinks differently. It's like asking a master chef to create their signature dish in a completely foreign kitchen with unfamiliar tools and ingredients. The cultural shock has been more significant than anyone anticipated. Hamilton isn't just changing teams, he's entering an entirely different ecosystem. The Mercedes way of doing things versus the Ferrari approach represents two fundamentally different philosophies of racing. Mercedes built their success on precision engineering and methodical excellence. Ferrari operates with passion, emotion, and an almost mystical connection to their Italian heritage. These aren't just different approaches, they're different languages entirely. Communication problems between Hamilton and his race engineer have become increasingly obvious throughout the season. You can hear it in the radio transmissions, sense it in the post-race interviews, and see it in the lap times. When a driver and engineer aren't perfectly synchronized, the car becomes harder to drive, strategy becomes confused, and performance suffers dramatically. It's like watching two musicians trying to play a duet while reading different sheet music. The team's struggles extend beyond just the Hamilton situation. Ferrari's car performance has been their biggest limitation throughout 2025, just as it has been for the past 15 years. Even when everything was working perfectly, neither Hamilton nor Leclerc had realistic opportunities to fight for race victories. The closest they came was in Hungary, but technical concerns forced them to back off and settle for less than their potential. That double disqualification in China became a turning point that haunted the team for the rest of the season. Suddenly, Ferrari became overly conservative with their approach, constantly worried about technical infractions rather than pushing the boundaries of performance. This defensive mindset affected everything from setup choices to race strategy, creating a negative spiral that made the car even harder to extract maximum performance from. Yet there were glimpses of what could be possible. Hamilton's sprint race victory in Shanghai proved that the magic is still there, buried beneath layers of miscommunication and unfamiliarity. When everything clicked, even briefly, you could see flashes of the Hamilton we all know and love. But those moments were far too rare, like seeing the sun break through storm clouds for just a few precious seconds. Vasseur's admission that Ferrari needs to understand Hamilton better reveals the depth of the problem. This isn't just about changing a race engineer. It's about fundamentally reimagining how the team works with their star driver. They need to learn his preferences, his communication style, his technical feedback, and his emotional needs during high-pressure situations. It's like learning a new language while trying to have a sophisticated conversation. The pressure on both sides has been immense. Hamilton came to Ferrari with sky-high expectations, not just from fans, but from himself. This was supposed to be his triumphant final chapter, the storybook ending where he adds Ferrari red to his legacy. Instead, he's found himself fighting just to keep up with his younger teammate, questioning whether he made the right decision. For Ferrari, the stakes couldn't be higher. They invested everything in this partnership, not just financially, but emotionally and strategically. This was their chance to finally break Mercedes's dominance and return to championship glory. When it's not working, every race weekend becomes a reminder of what could have been rather than what is. The engineering side of the equation reveals even more complexity. Hamilton's feedback style, developed over 2 decades, doesn't necessarily translate directly to Ferrari's engineers. What he calls understeer might be what they call something else entirely. How he describes tire degradation might not match their understanding of the same phenomenon. These seemingly small communication gaps create massive performance deficits. Looking ahead to 2026, Ferrari faces a critical decision. Do they persist with the current arrangement and hope time heals all wounds? Or do they make the bold move of changing race engineers, essentially admitting that their initial approach failed? There's no easy answer, and both paths carry significant risks. Changing engineers mid-relationship is like changing therapists in the middle of working through complex issues. All the trust building, all the learning, all the gradual improvement starts over from zero. But sometimes a fresh perspective and a different communication style can unlock potential that was always there, but simply couldn't be accessed. The broader implications for Formula One are fascinating. If Ferrari and Hamilton can't make this work, what does that say about driver mobility in the modern era? Are teams and drivers becoming so specialized in their approaches that switching becomes nearly impossible? Or is this just the growing pains of what could still become a legendary partnership? As we head into 2026, all eyes will be on how Ferrari handles this delicate situation. Will they give Hamilton and Adami more time to develop their relationship? Will they make the dramatic change and bring in a new race engineer? Or will they find some middle ground that addresses the communication issues without completely starting over? The clock is ticking, and in Formula One, time is the most precious commodity of all. Every race weekend that passes without progress is another missed opportunity to unlock the full potential of this dream partnership. The question isn't whether Hamilton still has the speed, or whether Ferrari has the resources. The question is whether they can find the perfect harmony between man and machine, driver and engineer, expectation and reality. This story is far from over, and how it resolves could reshape our understanding of what it takes to succeed at the highest level of motorsport.